Welcome, everyone, to another episode of When Death Awaits. I'm your host, Chris. We have Umar. How you doing, Umar?
I'm good.
It's good to see you. And Detective Richard Ramirez. Uncle Rich, how you doing today?
Good. What's happening?
Yeah, we're doing well here. And today, this episode is called The Walls Do Talk, and we are joined by someone who lives and breathes the world of crime scene investigation, Gabrielle Weimer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Gabby's a forensic specialist with over a decade of law enforcement experience across San Diego, Torrance, and now Ventura PD. She's been featured on the Today Show for cracking a 37-year-old cold case, and she's a storyteller at heart. Bringing the human side of crime to life through her podcast, The Walls Do Talk. Everyone check that out. Gabby, we're so excited to have you with us here today. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yes. So, it's been really exciting to learn more about you and listen to the podcast. I was hoping that today we can kind of dive into both of your little backgrounds and also, the psychology of just what you do on a day-to-day basis. And maybe we can start with upbringings, East LA, and Gabrielle, I know you're from Watsonville.
Yes.
Maybe we can share a little bit about that and how it was kind of coming up in your decision to hop into forensics and CSI and all of that.
Definitely. So if people aren't familiar with Watsonville, it's a small little town on the coast. It's Santa Cruz County. And so growing up, small, heavily Hispanic community. My dad's Mexican. Watsonville does have a gang population, so seeing that at a young age, being exposed to that, not directly involved, but it's right there on the peripheral.
Yeah.
And also, just a funny story I want to share, and I didn't even know that this was in my psyche, but my husband, amazing, he put together a compilation. When I turned 40 years old, he reached out to all family and friends, like, hey, share a story about Gabby. And so I'm watching this. I'm like, oh, it's great. I'm like, hey, there's my uncle. And he's on the beach in Mazatlan. He's like, hey, Gabrielle, I want to share this story. He's like, when you were little, me and your dad used to go hunting. He's like, you're about 3 years old. And we brought the deer back to Grandma and Grandpa's. And we're there dressing the deer, skinning, pulling all the innards out. And he's like, you were right there asking, can I have the knife? Can I do it? Can I do it? And my uncle's a high patrol. He's ex-high patrol, retired. And he said he looked over at my dad like, you got to keep your eyes on this one. And he said, but hey, look, you chose the right path, and you're doing great things with your curiosity. And I'm like, damn, I never even knew that was in my psyche or had that curiosity to see that at a young age. So,
wow.
You got to have the stomach for the job, right?
Right. I'm like, it's something. They always say there's something a little different about us crime scene investigators, and there it is. But growing up and I had an early attraction to law enforcement and investigations and just wanting to help the community as well. And so I think that's really what was ingrained in me and instilled. And so here I am today.
Fantastic.
And Uncle Rich, East LA upbringing.
Yeah, what's your deer moment?
Yeah, I can't say I had a deer moment. Although I did see quite a few people with knives back when I was growing up in East LA. And it's unfortunate because in many instances, I did grow up with a lot of violence in the neighborhood, unfortunately. And even to the extent of where I was robbed a couple of times by way of my 20 cents in my pocket. So, and I said to myself, you know what? I cannot allow this to happen. And to that extent, I went ahead and started preparing myself to see what I was going to do to better the community. And I started by way of giving out free lunches when I was 13 to the Boyle Heights community. And then from there went on. And when I went to college, I was helping out the immigrant community in the farm workers area up in Chico, California. And then from there, I came back, worked in the private sector for a little bit, and then went into law enforcement. And I would just say this, and I'm sure Gabby could probably attest to this, it's probably one of the funnest experiences that you can have, and particularly if you're orientated toward that. And by the way, as Umar just mentioned, you have to have a stomach for it. I truly do, because when you see violence, when you see sort of unfortunately grotesque type situations, you're not that startled with it. You kind of just take it with a grain of salt, and you kind of just prepare yourself to try and orientate yourself to see what you could do to try and solve the case. And it's unfortunate, but hopefully maybe Gabby can agree with this, and that is that you do sometimes have to move yourself out of that experience and just move forward with with trying to get the bad guy.
I mean, you touched on a thing with especially with now you have your own podcast, and we know the popularity with crime junkies and podcasts like that, which I think you have a partnership we'd love to hear more about. But the audience and listenership for true crime podcasts is like through the roof, and it's the reason why it's like one of the top two. It's like news and crime podcasts.
Right.
So I'm curious as far as like what is your involvement with the crime junkies, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So crime junkies, right? When I decided I want to do a podcast, I was going to start looking for inspiration and see who had the best podcast out there. And right away, Crime Junkie like grabbed me in, and I was knee deep in listening to them nonstop.
Not When Death Awaits.
You know?
I'm kidding.
yet.
Well, crime junkies is our goal too.
Yeah, Crime Junkie is number 2. Now, When Death Awaits is number 1. Got to give me time. I'll get there. No. But so that was like my first taste, and I was like, wow. And lo and behold, a couple years later, after listening to their podcast, I'm working a cold case, and I need funding. And I'm like, gosh, where am I going to get funding? And all of a sudden, boom, Season of Justice. Season of Justice is heavily advertised on Crime Junkies podcast as a nonprofit that funds. It gives funding to law enforcement agencies to help solve cold cases. And Ashley Flowers, who is the founder of Crime Junkies, one of the founders, that is her foundation. So I was just absolutely blown away. I was able actually to go and listen for her to do a live like kind of TED Talk, and I got to do a meet and greet, and I just thanked her. I was like, thank you so much for what you have created, because I'm actually working on a cold case right now, and Season of Justice is funding it. And so it was kind of like a surreal moment.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, the natural next question is, can you tell us a little bit about this cold case?
yes, definitely. So from an investigator's perspective, this was very unique for me to be able to interact with detectives on this case. Usually, like detectives, you guys take the homicide case, you run with it, you're interviewing suspects, you're doing all the workup. Essentially, you turn to forensics, like us, to analyze your evidence. This particular case, can I go full into it?
We would love
Okay.
I mean, everything, yeah.
Absolutely.
And we'd love to hear, Uncle Rich, your thoughts and reactions to the stuff that she shares as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a 1991 cold case homicide. It's involving Danelle Claus, and she was found in a field, partially clothed and bludgeoned to death, face down. Now, Danelle was a known prostitute, but she was also a wife and a mom. And so, unfortunately, when her drug habit would rear its ugly head, she would go out into the streets and prostitute to earn her money. So that's exactly what happened that evening. Her husband did know that she was going out. She was kind of on a bender, you would say, partying for the weekend. She was prostituting and working with a friend, another prostitute. And she said, let me just do one more trick. Let's one more trick, score a little bit more money, we get some more dope. So, all right. Well, they lost sight of each other, and the friend lost sight of her. The last moment she saw her, she was on a corner talking to a guy in a white truck. Friend turned around, 20 seconds later, Danelle's gone. She's found the next morning in the field, partially clothed, and her back of her head been bludgeoned with a rock.
Oh, wow.
So that's the scene. That's what detectives get at that moment in 1991. They do an amazing job. They collect a lot of great evidence. They canvass the area. They go through a whole list of potential suspects, witnesses, acquaintances. And the key piece of evidence that they do obtain is her sexual assault kit, right? And that is, there's a swab that's taken from inside. And she, on that swab, there's a male profile developed from semen, and they're like fantastic. But this is 1991. This is before DNA has really popped off. This is before we have CODIS, that DNA database. So the DNA profile just sits there. Finally, later in the 2000s, that male DNA profile gets entered into CODIS with hopes that it's going to hit, and it never does. It never hits to an offender, a missing person, nothing. It's just this unknown male DNA profile floating around in this database all these years. So fast forward, here we are in 2021, and we have a detective at the time, and he loves cold cases. And this is just right after the Golden State Killer got identified through forensic genealogy. Mm-hmm. He looks at me one day, and we're upstairs in the bay. He's like, hey, there's a great case sitting in the cold case, and it's a prostitute. She's been bludgeoned to death, and there's a male DNA profile. Go look at the case, see what we've missed. So at that time, me and my partner were like, cool. So we go down. It's very unique. Like, we're crime scene investigators. We're not detectives, but we get the case file and we start combing through it. So we see the male DNA profile. Cool. It's just chilling. But we see that the rock that they collected that was used to bludgeon her to death was never tested. They never tested the DNA on the rock. And her fingernails the clippings were never tested as well. Now, this is a violent crime, like it's close contact. So you're expecting her to have some form of DNA underneath her nails. So we approached the sergeant. I'm like, hey, I know we're just investigator crime scene, but we have all this evidence we'd like to get tested. Can we move forward with the case? He said, absolutely. Run with it. Do what you want. Like, we're busy. I don't care. Do what you want with it.
Where is this?
Ventura, California.
Ventura, okay.
Yeah. So we compile a team of the crime lab with Ventura County Crime Lab, detectives, and ourselves. We get the untested evidence tested, and it's amazing because the same male DNA profile that's found from her sexual assault kit shows up on the rock and under her fingernails. So we're like, excellent, we have our killer, right? Because she's a working girl. There's expected male DNA in there, but now we know we definitely have our killer's profile. Now we're at the crossroads. Well, we can't go any further. What do we do next? I'm like, can we finally use forensic genetic testing? And they're like, yeah, but that costs money, so good luck. And I'm like, I'm going to find the money. Like, so me and my partner were so determined.
How much money are we talking?
It's not that much. Honestly, we spent more on toys, and I think we needed like $9,000. That was it. I was like, it's just $9,000.
What kind of toys are you buying?
Like a pickaxe or a battery ram, I'm talking about police toy.
Yeah.
So I like expensive toys.
Yeah. Chanel bag.
That's for next episode.
Yeah.
That's more than $9,000.
So they give us this task. Good luck. You need to find money. We don't have money to give you. That's kind of what we got. I'm like, screw you guys. We're going to find the money. And we did. 2 weeks later, after reaching out to Season of Justice, I said, this is our case. This is why we need it solved. She only has one family member left. Wow. We need $9,000 or $8,750. Season of Justice only took 2 weeks to get back to us. They said, we love your case. Here's $9,000. That's a little bit more than you need. How can, just let us know, send us the bill, how we can help.
Wow.
And that was it. Okay. So I went up and told the sergeant, and he's like, oh, shit. I'm like, yeah, let's go. So Let's Go turned into a 3-year process.
Wow.
But it was very unique because the detectives allowed myself to work very closely with the forensic genetic genealogist. I was in constant contact with her, any updates, and then I would provide them an update. And as we narrowed in on our suspect, that's when then detectives kind of stepped in and started their role of creating a profile, identifying where the suspect potentially lived and their family to start putting all the puzzle pieces together. So it was a 3-year process. And during that whole time, we were in contact with her only surviving relative, which was her sister. So that was kind of as a whole different emotional side of things and a different journey. But they finally identified who her killer was because of a distant cousin. She had entered her DNA into Ancestry.
Wow.
She was an open book. She had no idea kind of what we were looking into and why, but she was like, hey, however I can help you, here's my family history. And they were able to identify the killer. His name was Larry Welch. He was in Riverside County at the time of his death, but he had spent time during the late 80s and 90s in our city, Oxnard, and in Ventura. So everything started to align up. He had a white truck. He did have a substance abuse problem, and he was known to be very violent and also a sexual deviant. They learned that through living family members. So we were able to obtain DNA from those living family members, and it was his brother that provided his sample, and it showed that it was a 99.9% match that he was first sibling to Larry Welch. No other, that was enough. That was enough for us to be like, we have identified our killer. He had passed away from a drug overdose probably 10 years prior or 10 years after he had committed the homicide. But so, yeah, that was a very surreal moment for myself as a crime scene investigator. We never got to work that closely with detectives and involved in a case.
Yeah,
So it
and
was amazing.
and it's interesting, real quick, along those lines that you were asking, more in terms of taking from what she just spoke. One thing that you have a greater appreciation for is working with all the entities that are involved. For instance, the nails. You have to go to the coroner's office because they're the ones that do the nail clippings, and you have to collect those from them. You're talking about the psychological component in terms of what it did to the family, and a lot of times people don't understand the impact that this has for years after these kind of things happen. And then lastly, and more importantly, your tenaciousness.
Hmm.
A lot of, unfortunately, and I touched on this before, a lot of investigators don't have that tenacity, don't have that drive, don't have that concern. So Gabby, my hat's off to you. Regardless of what the outcome was,
Absolutely.
the fact is, and unfortunately he did not face justice, but it did, in fact, you were able to solve it, and you were able to ease everybody's mind, not only in terms of the family, interestingly enough, but in terms of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've had a number of prostitute cases, unfortunately, and in many cases, those evolved into, okay, there's a greater concern. Is this person still out there? So that in and of itself has a huge impact on what we talk about. So again, congratulations. I truly do mean that.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's awesome. And to Uncle Rich's point, my follow-up question is like, did you approach like the family, the last remaining family member he had, and share this info? Do you have like a moral dilemma and like, hey, this person has no connection to this, maybe she's better off not knowing this, but what's the protocol there?
So I think it was on an individual basis. Of course, the sister of the victim, like we kept her in the loop as much as we could through the process. And, you know, if you don't hear from us, doesn't mean we're not working. Like we're gonna plug away on this. Do not worry. And so I'd get a call maybe every 3 months, just checking in, and or we would touch base. Hey, I can't tell you what we learned, but we got one step closer. And she's like, that's all I needed to know. As far as the relative that provided the information, the detective that was in communication with her said, once we get this all solved, I promise I will let you know exactly what we did, why you were involved, and about the case, if you want to know. She's like, absolutely. The family of the suspect, now that was interesting because they really were like, we had no relation with him. He was vile. He had a substance abuse problem, anger problem. So they were actually kind of pissed off that they weren't warned first about this news coming out. And like, how could you do this to us? And it's like, well, we're here for the victim. And she was a prostitute. We don't victim shame, so it is what it is. And I'm sorry we didn't warn you first about what was coming out, but we're here to speak on behalf of the victim.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, along those lines, in terms of identifying her, and if you want to call it a profession, we generally never made it a point when we disseminated that information to the public to identify her in such a manner, because unfortunately, in many instances, people lose interest.
Yes.
They were deserving of it, or they had it coming. Those kind of beliefs. And the reality is, as Gabby just said, we don't shame people. Our ultimate objective is to try and resolve these issues. And then later on, if anybody wants to discredit this person for their issues, that's on them. But the bottom line is, what we do is just make sure that regardless of who they are, what they are, where they come from, we're going to fight to try and make sure we resolve these issues. So.
And I love that Uncle Rich touched on the point of tenacity, and I feel like that's more important than ever, especially solving these cases. Is there something that you absolutely learned perhaps in your approach into going into something that you may approach differently with cases kind of coming up, or something that might kind of come in the next?
I think it's momentum. Keep your momentum. And then it's endurance as well. Like to keep that momentum, you have to be endurance. Like you have to stay on top, constantly touching base with whether it's the lab. How's the evidence coming along? You can't just be like, I submitted it and they'll get to it when they can. You have to check on it, like remind people, hey, we're still interested. Hey, we're still here. So I think that is important. Don't get discouraged. We did have a lot of people like, good luck. This genealogy thing, like it's going to be a white male, third cousin. Good luck. That's how it always ends. And I'm like, no, it's not going to end like that. Because I truly believe if you keep at it, something will arise.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned it's a 3-year process. What would you say was the most friction in that entire process? Like what took the longest, if there was something that you could speed up?
I'm going to say it. And if I get any backlash for it, I don't care because it's the truth, right? So the beginning, they're like, yeah, run with it. Do what you want. I don't think they thought we were going to get as far as we did. So that was easy because it was like green light. Sure, I'll sign this document,
Right.
sign the document, get what you need. Let me know what you
good luck.
find.
Exactly.
I don't, we're working on other stuff. When it finally came down to the wire of, hey, we potentially know who our suspect is. Their family lives out of state. We're going to need people to go sit on that family out of state and watch them and try and obtain DNA surreptitiously, meaning like they run out to the trash can, throw the trash away, go sneak and get that trash. Because we honestly, we don't know. We knew there was a brother. What if the brother's a killer? What if this is not our guy? So
Right.
getting the resources from our own department to entertain the idea, like, we're going to fly investigators out there and we're going to have them sit on this house and spend all these hours. They're like, not happening. I'm like, good. I'm glad it's not happening. You know what? Call the DA's office, call another agency, call the agency out there. Like, let's teamwork. And it was all of a sudden like, oh, no, this is our case. This is our baby. And I'm like, I don't care whose baby it is. I just want it born, like,
Exactly.
so I come from a mindset of, I love collaboration. If I can't do it, but we all work together, we're going to get it done.
Awesome.
It's never like, no, this is mine. I don't want you to have any glory. And I'm going to, no, I know. So there was some friction. I remember it was probably October. I'm like, cool, let's go. What's the next step? Let's make some phone calls. We're like, pump your brakes, girl. Now this is detective work. You don't, I'm like, So then January came around. I was like, what? I'm over it. I don't give a shit. Pass the case on. Let's go. Can you please just make a phone call and start getting some resources? And they finally did. So I felt like that was the most friction
Okay.
because I couldn't understand. I'm like, why? I don't care. Let's just who cares? Let's just get the case solved. Whether we solve it, another agency helps in solving it. I don't care because it's the victim's sister. It's the victim that we're doing this for. So
Yeah, I agree in terms of that issue. And it goes to what you're talking about, Chris, the tenacity. I rolled up to a scene one time where it's Christmas Day, 1 o'clock in the morning, and there I am, the Azusa police detective come up to me and he says, hey, can, this guy that we know did this one, did 4 others. I'm like, oh, why are you telling me? I'm just working on this case.
Yeah.
Turns out I had to go and developed information on those other 4 murders that ultimately ended up in a death penalty case. And yet those investigators could have done something, prevented why I'm there on Christmas Day. And I think that's another issue that I think Gabby hit on, is that we're also trying to prevent this person from doing it again.
Right.
And that's I think the biggest drive for those that are concerned about these issues is that we don't want somebody else to have the same victimization.
right. And a lot of times, like, based on the type of crime, it's coming.
Yeah.
You're like, oh no, they're going to hit again. Like, we need to get a move on this. Like, try to do everything, whether it's trying to get a DA to file the case or get an arrest warrant. And because that their nature, they're going to hit again. And sometimes I just find I'm all about collaboration. And sometimes I find like, no, people don't want to share information. They want to keep it very close to the vest. And I understand to protect like your integrity of the case, but at the same time, let's get that network of information, work together, and it's just about stopping it.
I'm curious in terms of talking about preventing further crime, right? Like that's part of like maybe the biggest reason to go after some of these cold cases that were unsolved before. I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but what I'm thinking is how have there been instances where you think like you have cracked something like that and you felt like, oh, we prevented something bad from happening again? Like any instances you can share?
Oh, countless.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sweet.
But you know what? Gabby's story is amazing in that she encompasses everything that goes right, but potentially everything that could go wrong. And I think in that regards, I have to say she touched on something that's I just, kind of my mind just blew up right now, and that is the district attorney's office. That regardless of how much information you might have, how much evidence that you may have put together, and how confident you are that you're going to get this person, the DA says, sorry, give me some more. And in that regards, I have to say, Omar, and I hope that answers your question, because you're trying to do something great. You're trying to put something together. You believe you have the confidence enough to move forward with it criminally by way of this person facing justice, maybe Gabby could talk to that point as well. You know,
It's so I'm not a district attorney. I'm not there, but I see from the crime scene side of things, I see how hard our investigators are working to put together a case. And when we do, I'm like, great, we have physical evidence. We have eyewitness. We have video surveillance. The detectives put together an amazing case. And we're talking about like serious crimes, sexual offenses, violent gang cases where they're a threat to the community. And they put together this beautiful case and they walk it over to the DA's office and they go, yeah, it's not enough. And it's like, what do you mean it's not enough? And a lot of times, because they want it like on this beautiful silver platter, and like, I don't think I'm going to win. I'm like, who cares about winning? If you're not violating someone's rights, take it to trial. Who cares about whether you won or lost? It's about protecting the community or that individual or fighting for them. So, like I said, I'm not there. I'm not a lawyer. But it's highly frustrating sometimes when you have like a high profile case or like our gang cases, like, yeah, just don't know. I'm like, they're gonna shoot up the neighborhood. We're gonna have another homicide this weekend. Like, please file the case, get the arrest warrant, let's go. And they don't know. So that's happened plenty of times. And the detective, it's so frustrating because they're just like, I don't know what else I could do. And it's defeating.
I'm not going to defend the DAs here, and I've gone to law school, but I've never practiced, and I'd imagine for them, the answer, if we were going to play rebuttal here, is probably there are rules and you need the preponderance of the evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt. And they, for whatever reason, they've worked the court systems and know how juries respond or how certain judges operate. And perhaps there is an element of laziness, like there are in the detective workforce, perhaps, and maybe in forensics. I'm not sure.
Gabby and I are truly just.
I don't know if it's lazy, but like I don't have any desire to like go further and show this is my forensic career and see all I've done. Like, I don't care. I just go case to case. Like, I love the groundwork.
Yeah.
Some DAs are like, I have high hopes of obtaining a seat at a higher ranking, and I want my record to reflect that, my winning record to reflect that. That's it.
I agree, and it gets to the point when you presenting a case, they're trying it in their office.
Yes.
And really. And I'm like, okay, and I could cite a number of cases, both as a gang investigator and as a homicide investigator, where you walk out, and I literally do mean this. Not me, I'm a little more diplomatic, but I've seen where they literally rise to almost a violent confrontation between an investigator and a district attorney.
Really?
To one extent, I remember a good friend of mine threw a file, and as the guy turned around, I don't want to file this case. Turned around, hit the guy in the back of the head. The district attorney. I mean, we talk about adolescents. We're professionals, and yet it got to that point, So
I could sense the frustration. Like you mentioned, momentum. You're building up case files and evidence, and then to hit a wall, it would seem discouraging. So to be able to have the tenacity and keep breaking through, incredible. And hats off to you.
There's a story. So it was kind of like, take that. Not for me, but I got to witness it. We had a very violent homicide. Lady was stabbed over 30 times by like a live-in roommate, partner, kind of. So we go to meet with the DA about 2 days later after the homicide because they want to see everything that we've got before we move forward. And I'm sitting in the room and we have detectives there, and the handling detective puts all, the pictures of the suspect and the victim and the scene up. Wow. And he goes, all right, sits his case file down, and the DA, she's in there and she's going through the file, and she's like, wait a second. This individual was arrested for strangling our victim a month prior. And the investigator was like, yes, he was. And she goes, what the fuck happened? And he goes, well, the case was rejected. Oh. She's like, it was? By who? He's all, well, by you. She didn't even remember. She just looked, and he's like, yeah, we presented the case, violent strangulation, great bodily injury, and you rejected the case. Said it's no good, won't file, wasn't not enough to move forward.
Wow.
So it was kind of like, take that. We could have prevented, maybe, or prolonged the death of this individual. Yeah. So that was kind of like haha moment.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. You hit the nail right on the head, Gabby. That's so prolific and it's just amazingly insightful. No doubt about it. That truly illustrate what we're talking about here.
Right.
Do you ever think there will be some part of the process that could change, or is it solely up to the DA to, say yes or no, put it in this pile, that pile?
I think
Is there
whoever
some
runs the
sort
DA's
of like,
office at that time,
I
right?
agree. Yeah,
Mhm.
there is
yeah,
a certain right now here in LA County. There's a regime change, and that regime change has in fact become more pro prosecution in that
got it.
regards. And I can't account for Ventura County, but they're I think a lot more cooperative with law enforcement than our previous regime at the district attorney's office.
Well, that's good to
And I'll
hear.
leave it at that.
Yeah.
Well, the community will be in great hands. A quick question about these cold cases and the evidence. You had mentioned the rock, for example, or maybe nails. You might have to get that from the coroner. Are there boxes in a warehouse or at the station that this rock is still there since 1991, or how does that work? Is it,
Yeah.
yeah,
So we're a smaller department. We're
okay,
definitely not LA County. So all of our evidence is housed right there at the department. And like I said, the investigators, they did an amazing job. That rock was held in the freezer all these years, exactly where it should have been, not like in dry storage or lost or just loose tumbling around in a box. So when the scientist, when she's like, please tell me the rock was in the freezer. I'm like, yes, it was.
nice.
And
Good job.
she was like, yes. But it just goes to show like their forethought and the
Absolutely.
care they took with this case. So
But they didn't test the rock.
I know. Well, because DNA, it wasn't a thing. It was like,
That's
cool, we
true.
know that's a murder weapon and we
We
can get her
just-
blood type, but that's about it. So for us, small agency, all in house. But I know for you guys, that's a different story.
Yeah, it is a different story. We have a horrible process of collecting evidence and the like.
Wow.
To the extent, if I may share a quick story, I kid you not, I got called in the office on an older case. There was a deputy had been killed. He was off duty, walking with his girlfriend, who happened to be estranged from her husband. This happened in Norwalk back in '91, I believe. And so they're walking at 3 o'clock in the morning back to her house. He's walking her back home. They live a couple doors down. And this guy comes up and he hits them in the back of the head, kills them both. And in one of those cement things that cover the gas and
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Anyways, make a long story short, they get the suspect in custody, and there was some issues with regards to Miranda. The investigator, because we picked him up about an hour later. I wasn't there, so I picked this case up
Yeah.
later on. Anyways, make a long story short, went to trial, and they found him guilty, 2 life sentences. They appealed the Miranda issue, came back, interestingly enough, to start another proceedings. So now they call me and they say, why don't you take the case? I said, okay. So I go to the courthouse. This goes to what Gabby was just saying. I'm fantastic. Because that's where the evidence would be held. Because this is a live case. They're going to keep in case there's an appeal issue. I go over there. I need the evidence, recordings, the rock, and all this other stuff. We can't find it.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
That's LA County.
Yeah.
And that happens often, or it has happened in the past?
I hope not.
yeah.
That's the first time it happened to me. And,
Wow.
and a matter of fact, they reduced the sentence from 2 life to 15 years each. And I think he's on the cusp of getting out.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long do they keep, like, obviously this DNA evidence you said in the 90s really became like a thing for cold cases or unresolved cases. How long if they do securely keep evidence, how long do they keep it in there? I'm assuming there was just a whole barrage of testing that went on once the technology came out. And hopefully there were a lot of justice served.
Yeah.
But what's the protocol now that, like, you'd imagine they test, but like, is there like storage has to be an issue?
Mm-hmm.
How long do they hold evidence for?
For me, my experience has been with CODIS. And what does CODIS stand for? I can't remember.
Combined DNA index system.
There you go. So, CODIS keeps your DNA forever, and it primarily because all of the murder cases the statute of limitation is limitless, so they never go away. So in that regards, DNA is fantastic because you're not going to lose that. And it's all it's a database and so
Digital.
forth and so on. In terms of other evidence, a lot of times people just lose interest, and I've had a number of instances where I couldn't find evidence that would normally have been, and we have what they call a poor boy at homicide, and we go back to, I think, 1936. We still have all of our cases there.
Really?
So yeah, and much of the evidence is still stuck in those little poor boys. So
How much value would there be, and I don't even know if this would be a thing, but could you ever see a team in the future that would strictly focus on cold cases and like solving these, past crimes that have happened many, many years ago to almost clear inventory, but maybe bring justice and bring that kind of community, right, camaraderie and
Absolutely.
safety? Would there ever be a team, or does such a team exist like that today?
Depends on funding of the department. So my experience with San Diego PD back in 2007 when I started as an intern with them, it was their cold case homicide unit. They had at least 7 investigators plus a sergeant. And that's why, I mean, if you pull up any news clippings on San Diego PD, they've been able to close like tons of cold cases because they have a dedicated team.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if the larger agencies have a dedicated team. Our smaller departments, no. It's like when you get time and some
Right.
curiosity, go ahead, do a
Right.
dive.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as a new homicide comes in, like that's on the back burner.
Exactly.
So my wish is that every department had a dedicated cold case team with funding to keep all those old cases alive and
Yeah.
working.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think there was some outrageous statistic that they had like 5,000 sexual assault kits here in LA County that had not been tested.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's really unfortunate. And a lot of it goes back to what Gabby says, resources, being able to have the manpower. And in our case with the LA County Sheriff's Department, we have a cold case unit they're all retirees. They just go in there and they work part-time. And they have had a level of success in terms of connecting DNA to a particular suspect.
Yeah.
To the extent that we had an Inglewood middle school teacher that I initially handled back in 2000, I believe it was 8, and ultimately we got a hit in 2021, and he was ultimately convicted. And it was interesting because right after trial, after he gets convicted, it turns out that he died of a heart attack while in custody.
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so he never faced justice.
Interesting.
oh, come on. Come back.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I would almost seem like there'd be so much value, like even these sexual assault cases, to package this up and have a dedicated team and just kind of tick them off one by one, especially with technology these days in 2025. I'm assuming things could be easier maybe with AI and,
It seems like Ashley Flowers and the Crime Junkies team, and at least there's initiatives to help support, like in
Yeah.
your case. So there is some public funding,
Right.
it seems like, in initiatives like that. So.
Yeah.
that's true.
And there's a big, I'm trying to think of the law that was passed right now in California where all sexual assault kits have to be tested. So we're actually going through huge inventories right now, all the way back to the 70s and 80s, testing all these sexual assault kits that had sat on the shelves for whatever reason, right? They were forgotten about, maybe the victim at that time back then. If they didn't want to move forward, we didn't move forward. Now it gets tested. If a kit's collected, it gets tested. So it's been actually pretty amazing. There's been hits from the 80s where you have a serial rapist has now been identified and they're already in prison because they finally got caught, years down the road. And maybe the statute limit, like it's already timed out, statted out, but like the victims, we may be opening a can of worms for them or old wounds, but at least they now have a name because some of these rapes were horrendous, very violent, and the women and men didn't die, but they never knew who their attacker was. And now here we are years later, and we're able to provide that for them. I would love to think that it provides closure for them.
Right.
I hope. But so it's been pretty amazing. I mean, we're going through caseloads, and it's throughout all the agencies right now because of this initiative that was
Amazing.
passed.
It also reminds me of that one sexual assault case of the woman that was found in the back alley that was completely incinerated on the pallet. I believe it was like one of our first cases.
Episode 1.
Listen,
Yeah, episode
you guys
1.
did an episode about that, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
we did. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Had he not lived, or I should say worked right there, probably wouldn't have found him. He was a brain surgeon beyond belief. But nonetheless,
You worked at the warehouse where the body was found, right?
Right? Can you stand right there?
Exactly.
exactly.
That's wild.
Yeah, that would be one example. But we actually got, by way of telephone records, and apparently we had a witness that saw them drive away together
Interesting.
and so forth and so on. So.
Are there any cold cases that you do have time for today, or in your current schedule? Are there things that you've heard about that maybe eventually you'd want to look into, things that maybe are internal or more types of cases that you want to bring justice?
Right. So internal, right now, I haven't looked into any new cold cases. There are a few that are constantly floating around in my memory bank right now that I'm like, I would love to be able to just get this tested.
Mm.
And I do have a few cold cases that we have requested the lab. Can we get some testing done on this? But we are added to a very long list of cases that are actively being worked. So it's great. There's a long list of cases that are being tested at the moment. So I can't complain on that, get in line. Right.
Exactly.
Right. And within just like the world of crime scene and forensics, I mean, it's always comes in and out of the news, the JonBenet Ramsey case. Like that will forever be who and why and how did it get so effed up and where do we stand? And I know they just made that documentary that came out, and I think they're keeping some items very close to the vest right now about their DNA testing. So
This is a segment where we dive into a lot of true crime headlines, viral cases, and what the internet can't stop talking about. So, from cold cases and cracking them wide open to courtroom drama blowing up on social media, if it's making news in the crime world, we're on it. So, this is something that's been going on. Gabby Petito, are you both familiar with this case?
yes.
So Gabby Petito, it's been a heartbreaking and highly publicized case. What started as a cross-country road trip turned into a nationwide manhunt. Internet sleuths and questions about domestic violence and media bias. This case has been shaking the world, and as we've seen, I think there's a Netflix documentary that just came out about it. There's still headlines. Talk to us about this case. Have you heard anything internally from your departments or any kind of personal opinions or facts that you're thinking about?
Yeah, any non-public information, confidential, you can share. We
Yeah,
would
of
love it.
course.
Almost, let me tell you, no. Okay, so with that case, I did get to sit through the like a 3-hour presentation that was put on by all the investigators that worked on that case. So that felt like, okay, I was very informed of, what had happened and how things transpired. As far as like the new information we're talking about, like the teeth, and there was nothing else linking him, and it's his uncle that identified his remains, which I think they shouldn't have done that. If that's truly how it was identified, it should have been an outside source, just like there's no bias, no connection, no room for question. But there were other things left behind where his body was found that indicated that he was there. So I know it's just not the teeth,
Mm.
Yeah, along the lines of the teeth. I mean that really stretches the the issues associated with identifying somebody, because you have to get dental records to make those comparisons. And then along the lines of Monday night quarterbacking, these cops that literally let this young lady go, Gabby, go with this guy while she appeared distraught.
Right.
And yet, and I know, Gabby, we talked about it in terms of separating parties, see what's going on. That's a very common practice in law enforcement. You always want to separate the domestic partners just to see what the stories is. No one's ever right or wrong. But if we had learned that she had been assaulted or she was in fear for her safety, there's no way you're going to put that young lady back in that van and let her go on her trek, because they were both from Florida and now they're in Arizona. And they're in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, we need to get a little more into what's going on here. And in that regards, I have to say, it's a little disheartening, to say the least, just to see her face, in that van, knowing that shortly thereafter she lost her life. So
and she was very distressed in those that body worn footage that was shown.
Yeah.
I mean, there's tears. Like she's whatever she said, oh, it's just this, or I'm just upset, and there's clearly something else that happened. And it makes me think too, like, being in this profession, I'm not a psychologist, but you learn a lot about human behavior, and you see so many different walks of life and experiences, and you start keying on different things. And coming from a perspective as a mother, like, how toxic or vile or violent was their relationship prior to this road trip? As from the parents' perspective, did they like him? Did his parents like her? Did they know that they were like, that was not their first encounter of physical violence, right? There had to have been I can't, something leading up to this, many more instances. I mean, unless it's the road trip and they're absolutely sick of each other, that's just freaking ignited the whole thing. I mean, that
COVID.
could be it. But I'm like, come on, there had to be warning signs along the
Right.
way. You don't just snap on a road trip with your girlfriend and then strangle her to death out of nowhere. There's a buildup. There's been a hit, there's a punch, there's a slap. There's not just like, damn, you make me mad.
Exactly.
Oh shit, I killed you.
Two sides to the
Yeah.
story. Who
Yeah,
knows?
and that you hit the nail on the head there, Gabby. You know, reading people's body language, reading how they speak to you, are all unfortunately substantive elements of a law enforcement officer. You just have a certain level of distrust, unfortunately, for everybody. You know, you just do. You always side with something's wrong here, and then we'll work into something's right, not the other way around. And that's why if you take that posture, you're guaranteed more likely to have a better resolution than if you just walk away. That's
Yeah.
been my
Good
approach.
yeah.
You know, so
It's a tough mindset because you could find yourself just overly cautious or swinging too far one way. Like I come from a family of doctors, and half of them are like, you're all right, because they see a lot worse, right? And then there's the other half that see really bad things, and then they naturally always are like, oh man, we got to go get this checked, even though it might not be a big thing. So I can imagine the similar in law enforcement, where you're just kind of like, let it slide, or oh, you know what, let's go hard into this. And there's pros and cons with each approach.
100%, absolutely.
Yeah. Crime scene, I'm always like, nope, we're treating this like a homicide. And that's how we've trained. Like, go into a suspicious scene, a suspicious death, as it's a homicide. Because then you can backtrack and be like, okay, cool, never mind. Natural or suicide, we're good. You can't be like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Because we've done that. Like, this is a suicide. And then I'll, 12 hours later, like, oh, it's not a suicide, it's a homicide.
Wow.
Get back out there. So you never want to feel that way. So,
Yeah.
and then I
agree.
don't want to be cynical of people, but I'm always like, something doesn't feel right here. And I was like, you say that about everything. I'm like, well, it don't feel right
There you
until
go.
it does. I'm like, oh, yeah, they're fine.
I know.
You go with the mindset that, hey, there's
Yeah.
something seriously wrong here.
Yeah.
And then you work your way down.
Yeah.
You got to take it down a step or two.
Which I'm glad to hear is with you guys in the force. You got to be assuming the worst, because the
Exactly.
worst could be really bad.
Yeah. So at least you're prepared instead of underprepared.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Of course, I look at some of these things from a when death awaits a lens, and to have you two here, I don't know if you have any experience with like active shooter situations. My question to you is kind of, what is law enforcement? How does the forensics? How do the homicide detectives deal with an active scene, and how is the department sort of preparing for it when it's happening live? Would love to get a few insights.
Wow. Interesting. In terms of active shooters, I would say I've had a couple of incidents that resulted in multiple deaths, but nothing of the the magnitude of where somebody goes into a festival or things of that nature. I've been fortunate in that regards. However, I mean, because if you look at the incident that happened in Monterey Park with the dance routine and things of that nature, I knew all the investigators that were associated with that, and they pretty much gave me an overwhelming type of briefing that it did become difficult, in particular because Monterey Park has a very limited amount of resources, so the sheriff's department had to bring that. But that aside, we could also apply those same principles to when a police officer is shot and killed. And having been responded to a number of those cases, you have massive amount of resources by way of in excess of 200, 300, 400 cops show up. And I'm not sure why, not to say that they're there for sympathy purposes, but when you got federal agencies, state agencies, and the local agencies all responding, and we have to kind of put them at bay, and then if we need those resources, will be available. And I think that's, to a large extent, what we talk about in the context of responding to any type of situation that requires law enforcement. Because I've always said, you can have those resources, but can you use them productively? Because in many cases, and in particular, I cited David March, and I talked to a number of those deputies that were up in Irwindale back in, I believe it was 2001. These deputies were responding, so were other agencies, and they were packed to the gills with bullets and guns and everything else. They're like, what are you guys gonna do? Start shooting up everybody? You know? And I'm like, hey, let's hold off on that, guys. You know, let's figure out what we got. And of course, by this time, the guy's down in Mexico, and we had to start all over again, which is another story for another day. But I'm just letting you know. I don't know, Gabby. Maybe you've had some level of exposure to these experiences.
So we, as crime scene investigators, we come in after everything has settled, essentially, right? I have not directly been involved in a mass shooting response. I say fortunately because I don't want to experience that. I was away on training and peer support. I'm part of our peer support. So I was in San Luis Obispo, and I remember waking up to about 20 missed calls on my phone. I had it on silent because I had a partner sleeping, taking training too, and I don't want my phone, pinging. And I said, oh, shit, So I called Sergeant. He's like, do you think you can come in? I said, absolutely. I'm in San Luis Obispo. He's like, turn on the news. Do you guys know what happened? I said, no. So we're watching borderline the developments of what took place. Ultimately, I get in touch with my partner, and she's like, okay, I'm here. I'm working with the FBI right now, and I'm working with Ventura County Sheriffs. We are responsible for being inside the location and scanning to take measurements and whatnot and document. I said, okay, I'm here. If you have questions or do you need me? She's like, I don't need you right now, but just be on standby. I said, absolutely. So we were in constant communication throughout. It was a 2-day process for her during that time. And I think I was more there as a peer support for her because she's like, yeah, we're just stepping over bodies right now. They haven't moved the bodies.
Wow.
So I'm going to go outside. And, so just listen to her, just explain that. And so that was her process. She said working with the FBI went very seamless. Like it was a good interaction. It was a productive interaction. They worked well. She said it was also a very slow, methodical. The craziness had already stopped. So for crime scene investigators, the craziness has stopped, and we're able to coordinate with FBI or other local agencies and work well. The other investigator that I know very well, she was on my podcast, and she explained her experience and what it was like working borderline, and she was there. So her job was to respond to the hospital for the sergeant that was killed. Oh. And she said that was a surreal moment. She felt like she didn't have the privilege to be there in that time. His family was there. The doctors were there. She was very quiet while he was brought in. She was there just to document him. And then her job was to respond back to the scene, work with FBI and searching for evidence and bullets and cell phones and other things that were discarded during the mass hysteria of everything. Mm-hmm. And she was also responsible for going to the autopsy. Or should I say autopsies, because there were multiple. So as a crime scene investigator, we kind of slow it down, but we're there a long time with the blood and the evidence and the bodies. So that's what it looks like for our response. And I also have a friend that responded, another great crime scene investigator, that responded to Monterey Park. And that's still in the process. She can't speak about it yet, but she's hoping to get on the podcast and share her story, her experience, and that's kind of like a therapy moment for her, I think, because she said it was pretty intense scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to a couple of the investigators associated with that. So, yeah, they're definitely felt it very impactful.
Do you find that the practice of the podcast and talking about it is cathartic? Is this a way for both of you, in a sense, to kind of maybe be, I don't want to say at ease, but at least talk about it in a productive kind of conversation? Is it? Would you say that that's like a good?
I see Uncle Rick pounding shots on the board.
I mean,
for me personally, first and foremost, I so much appreciate you guys letting me share these stories with you, because I think it brings to light what you need to do in order to address these issues. But in terms of the therapeutic aspect of it, you really never leave it. It's always with you. It stays with you. It'll remain with me for the rest of my life. And in that regard, sharing it, yeah, I guess it does help. That being said, is it okay if I sit on a couch while I talk to you guys?
We'll get one for next episode.
Get the balls.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah. Yes. So I think without the intention, without that being the intention, that's what naturally happens. You're right. It always does stay with you. I'm never going to unsee what I saw or smelt or
Correct. Yeah.
felt, the anger, the sadness. Um, so I think when I share my stories, I just love sharing stories. I think sharing stories is magic because you get to go into our world and it's fun. And I love to bring inappropriate humor and my sex toys and all that. Not mine, but theirs. My stories.
The $9,000.
Yeah. It was gold, diamond encrusted, 15 different vibrations. No,
Mother.
I've seen it all. No, but so I get to share these stories, and I like to share my stories with emotion and sensory and humor because I love humor. But I also like my audience to take away something valuable, a life lesson. And ultimately, what my driving force is, what I want to share and teach people is that we see some crazy fucked up shit and we meet the worst of the worst, but that is still a life lost. That is still human life being lost. And somebody's mama, son, brother, sister, baby mama is going to be mourning that loss. So have kindness and compassion and empathy and respect, regardless of what they did. Someone went through something horrific. So that's my underlining, so I get to share the story and I'm hoping that I'm reminding people like it's cool what we do and we see crazy shit and they're horrible. Just be respectful. That's a life loss and take that lesson with you.
I
in the
so much
world.
appreciate Gabby's description. This goes back full circle to what she was saying about the male and the female child, how the women have a more specific understanding. Here I am just giving you guys a plain out, straight out facts. She comes out and she brings all the other issues to light, which 100% I'm in agreement with, but I just can't articulate it as well as she does.
Be careful, Uncle Rich. We might have to replace you.
But it's true. We had a guy, and they're like, "Oh, he's a shithead. He finally had it coming to him." Well, yeah, you play with fire, you're gonna get burned, and he got shot in the face and died.
Jeez.
Well, you made it to 34. That's pretty good with all the crap that you've been getting into all these years. You made it to 34. And yeah, but whatever. You hear investigators, yeah, whatever, big deal. Well, you take a look into his file, and his file didn't start at the age of 14 being a little shithead. His file started at the age of 5, at 6, at 7. Complaining how he didn't want to go home because he didn't have any friends, or he was going to get his butt kicked by his stepdad because he didn't do well in school, and how he begged to stay with his teachers after school because he really just didn't want to go home because his mama wasn't there. He had nobody, or he wanted to eat at school because he had no food. And you see the development of the creature that died. And you, as a woman, as a mom, I can't help but feel for that individual. You didn't have a pot to piss in. You didn't have a good start. And so, of course, you had no love. This is how you ended up. And not everybody ends up that way because you have a choice. And I'm a firm believer in that. You get to an age where I don't want to live this life anymore, and you can make a choice. But half the time, a majority of these kids that end up in these crappy situations or do these horrific things never had a chance. So
yeah, it's fascinating. It's like nothing's so black and white.
Absolutely.
And you guys are in the business of serving justice, and you can look at that serving justice moment as the oh, this guy deserved it, or this guy got absolutely what everyone thought he should get. But like you said, you peel the onions and layer, and not everyone's kind of got a hero and a villain in them, right? And I think that's part of, obviously we're not in law enforcement, and obviously there are times we laugh over things that other people will probably be squeamish about. That's part of probably your process as well, but keeping the whole perspective in mind, which I appreciate exactly what you said, Gabby, is so important as we discuss these issues.
Absolutely. And I guess as a sign off from this, are there any sort of words of wisdom that you would have for perhaps younger listeners thinking and getting into the field of crime scene forensics, detective work, or is there some sort of mentor that you've had as well that's maybe shared a piece of information that has been helpful for your careers?
I will just say along the lines, and having dealt with kids that are in their 18, 19 that have aspirations to go into law enforcement, for those of you that want to consider this type of a profession, the primary objective is to become a good writer, because we are wordsmiths. We are in fact develop a description of an incident. Regardless of whether you have recordings, video, everything still has to be documented in the written word. And if you don't have those skills, generally speaking, you're going to become a liability to whatever agency you work for. And in that regard, you have to have good writing skills, good reading skills, and more importantly, the desire to write these things down. Because if you have an adverse belief in writing, do not come into this profession, because everything is documentation. That would be my primary words of wisdom that I would share, because I've seen it time and again where people have written FBI investigations were sparked because of the poor writing of these individuals. So that, in that regards, I'll just share that. There's so many other aspects, but that would be my primary one.
So if you're a jock, stick with LAPD, but if you got some brains, get it inside.
Yeah, the running joke was I didn't get into LAPD because I scored too high.
The sheriff's department.
And I didn't say that, by the way. LAP said that about sheriff's department. So
We won't blow your spot. Yeah.
That's funny. So whenever I speak with young individuals or any individuals that want to get into this field, I would say, okay, first and foremost, you have to have a curiosity. You want to see a dead body. And they go, that's kind of weird though. I said, no, it's natural. If you have no desire to see death, you don't want to get into this field. But if you're like, I want to know, it's cool. We're good. We're on the right
Little
path,
spark.
right? You need to have that kind of morbid curiosity. And so you're okay with it. And the other thing I say, yes, it's fun and exciting, but we are paying attention to detail. So we do have to slow it down. You have to document very well. That's going to save your butt. And that's going to, bring to light new evidence. Document very well. So you do have to take your time and be methodical. And then more on the heart side of things. Crime scene investigation can be very black and white in how you process a scene. We have certain procedures that we follow. We have certain methods in chemistry we use to develop evidence. But what is going to change you or make you different from the rest is the heart you have. Because if at the end of the day, after all these years of crime scene investigation, I've learned I like doing crime scene investigation because it's cool, but I like to help people. I truly love and appreciate people, and I want to be of service to the community. So if you want to become a crime scene investigator and you're like, I hate people and I don't care about the community, don't.
Right.
Go find something else or work in a lab or something that's very robotic. But when you have to have that connection, that interaction, love death, want to see a body, have a good heart, want to serve your community.
yeah, I agree. And I'll just give you one example, and that's a very good point, Gabby. I handled a shooting where a suspect was threatening to shoot the deputies. He was sort of corralled in a porch. And this actually went viral, but it was taken off social media immediately. I don't know if you saw it, Gabby. And I get there, of course, after, but they're videotaping the entire scene. And he gets shot 107 times.
Holy moly.
And what's more fascinating about it was they had sort of a game plan. And they initially sent the dog, and this young man said, if you send the dog, I'm going to shoot the dog. So they send the dog.
Okay.
Well, you can see in slow motion, the dog comes up, about to bite him. This guy comes up, and he throws something. It turns out to be a black slipper. And the dog is coming this way, and they shoot and kill the dog.
Oh, no.
And of course, our suspect now, which by the way was not armed, he was just threatening. But the interesting part about, and this goes to your point, and I've said this time and again showing this video, is that when the deputies walk up, they pick up the dog and walk away, not do one eon of checking to see if this young man is still alive. And I would just say, I went to the shooting review and with the sheriff, and the undersheriff said, how many zeros am I going to put on this check? I mean, that, and I say to you on that end, because it's very important, is that understand that even if you don't have any sense of humanity and you know you're on video, pretend. Because
Like this.
exactly. Do something to make it look.
Yeah.
But the reality of that imagery, thank God it didn't disseminate out onto the world, because it made Rodney King look like a cakewalk, you know. It really did. It was bad.
Yeah.
And I digress. I just wanted to share that with you because, I mean, you talk about the issue of, you know, having committed, this thing was definitely could have been resolved by way of negotiations. Instead, it escalated and so forth and so on.
Wow.
I'll show you guys the video.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good teaser for the next episode.
Oh, I don't want to take blame for that
Yeah.
one. I'll tell you that much.
Just leak it.
Leak.
We had this in from an anonymous sender. I'm going to play this for you really quick.
Well, on that note, just wanted to thank you, Gabby, for coming on the When Death Awaits podcast. We look forward to checking out your podcast as well, and hopefully, having more conversations in the future.
Yeah.
For those who are listening and watching, don't forget to subscribe and like to the podcast. You can check us out on social media and our new website at whendeathawaits.com. All right. I think that's it for one.
Thank you
again,
guys.
Gabby.
It's been a
Appreciate it.
pleasure.
Appreciate it.